the argument together, that is driving towards a value-based consideration of what procurement are delivering, rather than just, because for a lot of organisations, and I don't, it's not the fault of these organisations or these procurement teams in a lot of cases, it's just the way they're targeted and structured and limited. It's like, how much did you save up front at the point of contract? That just is not reflective of the end result in services.
Yeah. Oh, absolutely. And you always, again, you've got this constructive challenge of essentially making sure you've got a competitive rate. I think that you can't move away from the fact that you need to deliver against your budgets. And when we report into the CFO, so we're very close to the numbers and how we need to deliver those, and especially with my finance background. But at the same time, you need to ensure you're getting quality from in service procurement. You're looking at the quality of the delivery, and that sometimes that's not going to come cheap. But you need to benchmark it so that it's competitive at least. And I think that's important that we need to work through that with and using the scale of your organisation to get that competitive rate.
Yeah, you're bringing up loads of great points here, which is why I keep making notes. So rate, I want to come back to looking at that, but I also want to come back to quality, because that is the metric that often gets left out in services procurement. It's like, what saving did we make up front, which is not an accurate reflection of total savings, in my opinion, anyway, because anything could happen post-contract. Yeah. But the quality is very interesting, because you've got the quantitative metrics that if you're capturing this stuff effectively in a platform, for example, you'll be able to see for every supplier, for every project, for every milestone and deliverable, were they on time, were they on budget, how much did it shift, how many changes, what was their average cost overrun, all this sort of stuff. But then you've got the qualitative information on the people within your team, your business, saying whether they did a good job or not. That's the quality metric, really, isn't it? Because otherwise it's like something that, for a lot of organisations, it's way down the line. Yeah. The project's gone off the rails, the settlements left, right and centre, everyone feels hard done by, and it's pretty much impossible, because it's not documented, to go back and assess what the quality was or why it went wrong. Yeah. How do you guys kind of pull together that quality assessment, as it were?
It's tough, is the short answer, because you can use various kind of things. So you've got Net Promoter Score you can use, but again, that's very subjective. And what we've tried, there's a couple of ways you can do it. So you got the Net Promoter Score. You've got, I think you need to find as much quantitative way to do it as possible. So
of course you do. You used to work in finance.
Indeed.
No, I 100% agree.
I
agree.
Yeah, and I think tech services are good. Again, we keep going back to tech services because I think it's clearly a passion for both of us. But I think what we've got now is, I think there's various tools out there now, and one we use within the company that can measure developer and productivity.
Oh, right.
So we find that really useful, because that, again, is something we've not been able to measure well in years gone by, but now actually our engineering function can go, okay, well, we've got developers both internally and externally. It's in the environments that they're developing on, and they can see actually what's the velocity, what's right first time in terms of coding, etc., which gives us that quantitative measurement. But ultimately, you still need subjective. Okay, well, when it's maybe a bit of advisory work or delivery work, which is not necessarily measurable. I think what we've started doing now with our consulting preferred supplier list is every engagement that finishes, we ask the stakeholder to complete a very quick survey, captures their feedback on how well this particular project went, and we can collect, again, it's more data to collect and then feed back to our consultancies to say, well, this is where you've done well, and this is where there's been a few engagements here that you've not done so well, and is there a theme developing from the supply base? You can actually feed it, and then you're it's not just beating them up at the till. You're actually getting some feedback you can give back to them to say, well, next time you get an engagement in this particular area, these are where you need to focus your efforts on and improving that, but on that basis. But also, this is what you seem to be working really well with this team or on these particular kind of projects, and that's actually you're doing well there. So keep it up and look to continually evolve and improve in that space too.
And to a certain extent, you could look at that as challenging the supplier a bit more. Yeah. But surely it's got to be an overall benefit for supplier relationships in terms of going to that depth, because you're not just looking at the areas where they can improve. which should be good for them anyway, because it means they can do a better job for you to get the feedback. But you're also looking at where they've done a good job.
Yeah, 100%. Well, when we talk about earlier, we were talking about the issues with people looking to bring in services through the back door.
Yeah,
we want this all to come through the front door because, and ultimately because we want our stakeholders to trust the suppliers we're putting in front of them and the options that we're giving them from a procurement perspective. So, and if you're able to then give that feedback to the supplier to say, this is what you're doing well, this is what you're not doing so well, and you need to perform in these areas and improve and improve your performance here, that's only good then when our stakeholder needs to find a solution and to deliver an outcome. So, because we don't want them to say, okay, actually, your list was the guys you sent us to were poor, so we've got our mates over there that we want to use. So you're trying to find a balance where you're just giving your stakeholder the right options with the right framework, the right commercials, the right quality that they can deliver what they need to deliver. Because ultimately they shouldn't care who's doing it as long as they're getting the quality. But if they don't feel they're getting that quality, that's when they'll come with their own options. And that's why these close relationships with your stakeholders and your suppliers will help you get to that get to the right delivery framework. Again, we haven't perfected it by any stretch of the imagination, but I think we're making headway in cracking that nut.
Yeah, it feels like a very grown-up approach to it, and like I say, I find it very, I applaud your attitude of you've got very much kind of like just wanting to progress and learn and improve all these things, which is great, but whether you've got to the end point of solving these problems or not, you guys are trying to solve these problems. And I think that's the important thing. And I think that's where it's interesting for other people to hear what you've been doing, because it's like, well, you know what, you can go out and try and solve these problems. If you get the right executive support, if your business is set up in the right way and your procurement function are fit for purpose to do it, you can go after these things. They're not easy, but they're worthwhile.
Yes.
And I think that's the end game of it, really, isn't it? All of this stuff is complicated, but it's it's not quite flying a rocket to Mars. It is doable.
Yeah,
but
and flying a rocket to Mars is good. Maybe that's moonshots, but actually to get there, there's quick wins you can do along the way that helps you and ultimately the business deliver what needs to be delivered. And making those quick wins helps you get the confidence along the way to then keep going. And you may not get to Mars, but maybe you'll get to another planet that's closer.
Yeah, and I think with the way the market is so competitive, the way there's so much change in the market, the big thing it always comes back to for me is if organisations aren't addressing services procurement, like you guys are addressing it, you're sort of saying it's not perfect, but we're working on it and we're trying to improve it and we're getting value from it. For organisations that aren't doing that or have got blockers in the way of them doing it or have not even thought about it, I personally think they're going to struggle to be competitive in the market, because just the speed of change, the demand for the skills and the capability and the capacity from the supply chain, they are finite. Yeah. So where people are, bringing in new technologies or doing new things, it's kind of like as much of a war for talent within the supply chain as it is within the permanent headcount.
Agreed.
So I do think fundamentally the drivers for this are top level business drivers. Yeah. Can your organisation compete effectively in the market? And it feels very much like you guys are looking at this strategically, which I think is great. And also I think it just gives procurement the ability to sort of like elevate their function, particularly when it comes to services. Like I say, I think you've got a very, very supportive exec structure in place. But, there's so much value. I always find it fascinating. Going back to data, I love the data myself. The amount of data that procurement are privy to is astonishing. Yeah. And you sit at this intersection where it's like, and I'm talking about, metrics, and I'm also talking about more the sort of like qualitative data that you're getting, because you're getting feedback from all different angles. You're getting feedback from the supply chain on what your internal stakeholders are doing, how the teams are performing, how they're interacting with them. You're getting information from your internal stakeholders on how the supply chain are performing. And so you've got this kind of 360-degree view on how effective the company is at doing stuff. And obviously you're looking at how you're doing stuff as well. I think that data is really fascinating, because for a lot of organisations, if they just take things on a very surface level, and for example, if they're not looking at, not trying to measure quality, although it's never easy, then they can end up making snap decisions, and suppliers get blamed for stuff where it's actually not the supplier's fault, and the inefficiency might sit in the organisation because a particular team are too busy on something else to bother with the consulting firm that's supposed to be spending time with them, and it ends up taking loads longer, or they didn't scope it properly and it all shifts and that costs more money. I feel like that's quite an important consideration when it comes to the sort of like total view of this.
And it's so important that you understand all of those moving parts, and I think being in services procurement is an education all the time, because you're trying to solve those problems while those problems are happening, and bringing those bits together you've just mentioned is kind of what makes the job so interesting, really.
And when an organisation says, okay, we've got to make cost cuts, for example, I've seen plenty of situations where the organisation will basically say, we need to cut our consulting spend. And if they don't have visibility, if they've just got like PO level data, then they can say, how much did we spend with Accenture last year? People are going to know that. What were they working on? What projects did they deliver? What were the outcomes of those projects? That's different. And so if you need to cut, for example, consulting spend, how do you know what to cut? Are you cutting stuff that's like actually really driving your bottom line or really helping new product growth versus stuff that's maybe a bit more wastage? It's just, you've got to have that visibility and that information. And it's like companies are struggling on. It's amazing when we see quite often big, highly complex organizations, sometimes technology-based organizations, that are trying to run this stuff on email, spreadsheets, and just Word documents and PDFs and stuff like that. And it's just the level of information, the volume of data is just too big, and you just can't do it. And they kind of, I feel like from that point of view, there's almost like a chunk of their workforce capacity or their work capacity where they're just basically flying blind. And it's you know, I find it difficult to understand why some organisations aren't trying to address that. But I guess it feels like getting started is quite difficult if you haven't done it before.
Yeah, I think so. Because some of this stuff is not. It sounds obvious, and I said just the example I gave earlier in terms of, you know, somebody saying, just give me my workforce data, and not being able to provide that straight away. Kind of it's those simple questions that have then everyone's going, oh, hang on a second, and before you know it, you realise what data you're missing to actually help you make those critical decisions. But where do you start? At what point? At what point do you start? Where do you look? Where do you go first? And actually clean data, or better. You're not going to get 100% data. Maybe that's the utopian we're not going to get to. But actually, you know, you want to get as close as possible to that, and 80-20, 90-10 is okay actually in terms of making some of those decisions.